If you enjoy our work, consider making a donation to mixtapestories.net or at Patreon/mixtapestories, all one word. Thank you. Mixtape Stories, creating beautiful fiction in a disappointing timeline. Lewis Henry awoke into a world humming with electricity, rush hour traffic, and social media, a reality where the shift never happened. He is a survivor of a cataclysm averted, a veteran of a war that never was. And it's here where Lewis finds his old enemy, perched in the seat of power once again. Alone and alienated in a digital dystopia, the only thing Lewis has left is the determination to bring justice to the man who committed unspeakable crimes. Join us for the 3-part miniseries, Ride the Wilderness by Michael Juge.
I am not your rolling wheels, I am the highway.
General Henry, what is your 20?
Bravo 6, this is Bravo 2-6. We got contact at the mall, encountering heavy resistance.
Copy that, 2-6.
General, we've moved the wounded to the Bed Bath & Beyond.
That'll have to do. Lieutenant, get a fire team up on that bluff. We're exposed with our cheese in the wind out here.
On it.
And prepare to move out as soon as we've secured the site and the MASH unit arrives.
Colonel Kendra's located the 777s. They're set up on the ridge at the Applebee's.
Damn it. That's where I'd set up. And that's where they're hitting us.
General, they've engaged the cannons, but their flank is exposed.
Get the colonel on a horn and tell her we're coming.
Lewis, move to your right. Now.
Over that minivan, Corporal! You still with me?
Yeah, thank God.
Wrong one. But she said you're welcome.
We got the 7s. We got the 7s.
General, the colonel took out the cannons.
Thank you, Kendra. All right, vicious rabbits, let's move.
Lois? Venti Americano with an extra shot of espresso for Lois?
Excuse me? I think that's yours.
Oh, thanks.
Lewis grabbed his coffee and took a seat nearest the window. Morning rush hour. People dressed in suits, wearing uncomfortable shoes, all freshly scrubbed, spritzed with perfume, aftershave, and drinking every variety of coffee. Coffee. It was about the only thing he liked about this Gaia-forsaken place. Well, that and soft toilet paper. Though his counterpart's body had never been without it, the sensation of caffeine was welcome. Lewis did his best to appear casual as he gazed out the window onto K Street. The vehicles passing by looked fancy, as they were not the rusting husks he was used to seeing. The designs had evolved too. Most now had LED lights, and some were even fully electric. All around him, customers occupied their time on their cell phones.
Okay, Lewis, they call them smartphones now.
He reminded himself, and pulled out his own. Well, his counterparts, actually. Lewis put on a pair of earbuds and acted like he was listening to a podcast as he sipped on his coffee while keeping watch on the entrance to the building across the street. The minutes passed, and Lewis began to wonder if the Regent's plans had changed. But just then, 2 black expeditions slowly approached in the rush hour traffic. Lewis jolted out of the Starbucks and jogged across the street towards the motorcade as they pulled up to the front entrance. He walked briskly. His right pinky skimmed the edge of his overcoat. Lewis was a rifleman at his core, but he had been in enough shootouts over the years that he was confident that he'd be able to draw his pistol and take out the target before the region's security could get a bead on him.
Lewis, don't do it.
Breathe. Exhale. Shoot.
The guard in a charcoal suit exited from the front and opened the rear passenger door.
That's it, you asshole. Come on out.
Lewis, this is not the way.
He saw a head pop out. It was the wife. Next, it would be the Regent himself. Lewis felt the Glock on his hip, ready to take out the mass murderer.
For Gaia.
But the other passenger was a child. The guard shut the door, and Lewis withdrew his hand from the coat and kept on walking past them. Lewis caressed the photo of Meredith and her kids, while his bike-mounted cavalry caught their breath at a Love's gas station as he leaned up against a cigarette case. Thanks to Colonel Kendra, they had broken through the quagmire of the outlet mall and made it to Lynchburg. The photo had been taken last Yule, but it was already fading. Post-shift produced film wasn't as good as the pre-shift counterpart. Esther had grown 3 inches since the photo had been taken. Yorick and Shonda looked like twins, being only a year apart, and sharing the same darker mocha tone than Esther. But all 3 shared his wife's eyes, Meredith. Her emerald eyes seemed to look back at him through the celluloid. A year ago, he wouldn't have dared possess this photo. The Lambs of God were still winning, and if he got capped, they'd search his body and they'd find this picture. They would then have a clear photograph of his wife, learn who she was, and they'd be able to pick out their children from the others in Greater Monticello. But by Gaia's grace, the tide of the war had turned in the Orange Pack's favor. The Regent's mansion lay just beyond Lynchburg. General Lewis Henry had led the Vicious Rabbits' bike-mounted cavalry all the way from Charlottesville through the quagmire of the Blue Ridge Outlet Mall and was prepared to fight street by street in Lynchburg if necessary. Fortunately, the vast majority of the civilians were not eager to throw in with the Regent. 14 years of theocratic rule had been enough. Most of the log conscripts surrendered without a fight. But the die-hard Lambs of God and all of the remaining sheepdogs still awaited Lewis and his Vicious Rabbits at the Regent's compound. While the last stronghold of the once mighty empire of the Home of the Faithful was reduced to 12 acres, it was heavily defended by artillery batteries arranged in a concentric ring. Intelligence estimated 5,000 war-hardened sheepdogs lay within the gates. This was going to get bloody. Had air power still been a thing, Lewis would have called in a sortie like he used to in Iraq. Then again, so would the Regent. As it stood in the post-shift world, they made do with what they had. Along the way, they liberated one of the penance camps. It was a gut-wrenching sight. The prisoners reminded every warrior what the Regent would have done to all heretics, be they Gaians from Greater Monticello or anyone else in the Orange Pact, had the war gone his way. When he and his division reached the gas station next to the Applebee's, Lewis learned of Colonel Kendra's death. She was just a kid when they met, a high school student. But her faith in Gaia and Lewis's training had molded her into one of the fiercest warriors Lewis had ever met, be it during his stint as a Marine or as a Vicious Rabbit. When she was promoted to the rank of colonel, Kendra refused to be referred to by her last name, because the last thing she wanted was for warriors having to address her as Colonel Sanders. Lewis gave a weak smile.
You'll always be Colonel Sanders to me, Kendra, but no one will ever call you chicken.
He could still see Kendra shaking her head at the stupid fast food reference that lost its relevance in this world. His radio operator leaned over the counter to get his attention.
General Abraham says they're ready, sir.
Corporal Jenkins had been with him the entire campaign. The kid was only a couple of years older than his daughter. Gaia willing, Shonda will never have to experience war. His thoughts turned to home. His wife, Meredith, running the Raven Institute, his 3 children, and the world that they built for themselves in the years since the shift first struck. He owed everything to Reverend Dora Luevano, who made Greater Monticello a beacon of hope, rallying other communities to stand up to every gang and every wannabe empire that took advantage of the chaos. Reverend Dora was also the one who led Lewis to Gaia. He hoped she would still be lucid enough to tell her the good news should the day be theirs. Lewis took one last look at the photograph before putting it back into his pocket. He turned to the corporal.
Tell Abraham that we're rolling.
Lewis stood up and helped Corporal Jenkins lug the radio onto her back. Being a post-shift make, manufactured to withstand the occasional EMPs, the radio with its vacuum tubes and thick copper wires was heavy. He stood atop the counter where cigarettes and lotto tickets were once sold.
Our time has come. Our orders are to apprehend Regent, and that is exactly what we are going to do. But we're going to have to burn through the cauldron to earn it. And if we must replenish the earth with our blood, it will be for a just world. But know that we will never yield. Generations will remember what we did here today.
Reverend Luevano had written that speech for him weeks ago because it kept her mind focused on something other than the pain.
This is our moment. Vicious rabbits never say die.
Vicious rabbits never say die.
As they rode towards the compound, Lewis started singing to himself.
I am the highway. I am not your carpet ride.
Lewis supposedly owned the condo in Crystal City, the one he, for lack of better words, woke up into a month ago. But walking inside the sterile unit, it might as well be corporate housing. Lewis got a beer from the fridge and sat on the recliner. There were no family photos to look at, nothing but hotel art. He closed his eyes and recreated the photo of Meredith and the kids in his mind's eye. He remembered Shonda wearing an ugly pre-shift Budweiser sweater, and Yorick dressed in a homespun tunic. Esther donned all black. Goth somehow survived the shift, and Meredith wore a shimmering blue dress that he reclaimed from a Nordstrom's out in the necropolis. Lewis wished to touch her, or even just touch the photo again. Failing that, he turned on the TV to a news channel. The rolling ticker at the bottom of the screen alerted that Pastor Dan had met with the president to discuss next steps after withdrawing the U.S. from NATO.
Gaia. What a shit show.
When Lewis first awoke into his counterpart, his body was running a high fever. Dizzy, he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. It was all wrong. He was in an unfamiliar bedroom. The view from the sliding doors, he could tell that he was several floors up in a high-rise building, and he could hear traffic below. Traffic? He hadn't heard rush hour traffic since, and the TV, it was on. He noticed something about it. The screen was super thin. and the cell phone charging next to his bed was like nothing he had ever seen. This had to be some kind of fever dream. As he recovered from this thing called the superflu, Lewis had come to understand that he had awoken into a version of himself who lived in a world where the shift never happened. Having gotten his bearings and reacquainted with watching TV again over the past month, Lewis glowered at the news footage of Pastor Dan palling it up with the president.
You're supposed to be dead. Bandits!
Lewis shot up when he heard a knock on the door, drew out his Glock, and scurried behind a support beam. And then he realized that bandits didn't bother knocking. And they didn't exist in this world. Not in Crystal City, anyway.
Yes.
Open up, knucklehead.
Lewis sighed with relief. He stashed the pistol under the couch and opened the door.
What up, sis?
The two hugged, and Vivian took a seat at the IKEA dining table, while Lewis plopped back down onto the recliner.
So, you quit your job.
Lewis nodded and took another swig of beer. It tasted like piss compared to the brew made in Montpelier. It was an odd collective of Catholic and Buddhist monks and Sufis, but they were solid allies in the war, and they made a fantastic ale.
I found out when I called your office. They told me you quit 2 weeks ago.
I didn't see much point in staying.
He tried to make sense of all of the circuits that his counterpart was running at Raytheon, but it was too much. And what was the point? Vivian gave him a pained expression. His counterpart didn't even have a photo of her, his one living relative. He had to have been a recluse. His sister looked heavier than he remembered. So too did he himself, and everyone walking the streets. Vivian steepled her fingers together.
Your memories still haven't returned, have they? The actual ones, I mean.
He shook his head. Before emerging here, his last memories of home weren't exactly pleasant. He was drowning, struggling to get free as he descended under the current of a river. The panic of desperately wanting to breathe, the light above rippling away. And then he awoke here, in this soulless condo with a fever.
I've been doing some research on the superflu. Back during the pandemic, there were a few documented cases of people having their memories altered.
My memories weren't altered, Vivian. They're real.
Really? This shift thing you keep talking about that supposedly happened 20 years ago?
Yes. July 11th, 2006. You don't remember any of it, do you?
Vivian shrugged helplessly.
I should have taken you to the doctor. I thought it was just a fever. The sick pigeon did a number on a lot of people, but it's been over a month.
It seemed impossible. The day that fundamentally redefined the words before and after was just another day for Vivian and everybody else in this world. But anyone who lived through the aftermath of the shift knew where they were on that day. Lewis was at the Northrop Grumman office in Roslyn, coordinating a shipment to Ramstein and playing music on his iPod to drown out the ringing in his head. He had been dealing with tinnitus ever since the Hajis took out his platoon outside of Karbala 2 years earlier. The IED took out his MRAP and got him medically discharged and left him with this constant ringing in his ears. The moment that first EMP struck, his monitor went blank. His iPod cut out. Vehicles on the street crapped out, some crashing into each other. All of the noise of civilization suddenly ceased. Everyone at Northrop knew what it was. It was an EMP. Engineers replaced circuit boards, and power was restored, and it lasted a few minutes when another EMP hit. Through the gasps of engineers, through the ringing in his head, Lewis could hear a voice calling for him.
Come and find me, Lewis. The President's Mountain Farm. I am waiting.
He had no idea what the voice was, who she was, but he knew the President's Mountain Farm meant Monticello. His parents took him and his sister there as kids, and the place stuck with him. Maybe it's because it's where he learned that presidents owned black people as slaves. The reality of history hitting home. Maybe it was because it was one of the few family vacations they ever took. With D.C. being only 2 hours away, it was something his family living in Oxon Hill could afford. Knowing there were multiple EMPs meant something catastrophic. Lewis cycled over to Vivian's apartment in Silver Spring and convinced her that they had to leave the city before the panic set in. The voice of Gaia led him and his sister to salvation. Where was she now? He hadn't heard her voice since arriving here. Lewis sat in a recliner, whispering,
Please, Gaia, where are you?
Lewis, who are you talking to?
Nobody, just...
His attention turned to the TV. He had forgotten how distracting it used to be. The journalist was discussing the legal fight after the president ordered that all federal employees swear an oath of allegiance to the president.
I don't know why you watch that communist news network.
Vivian grabbed the remote and switched it to her preferred reality, One America.
So you don't find it unsettling, just a little bit, that people have a pledge of allegiance to a man?
We have enemies, Lewis. Traitors within the government, within every facet of society. They've been indoctrinating our children for generations. The president and Pastor Dan are doing what they have to in order to restore law and order.
Lewis grimaced. To hear his own sister, a woman who served in the Vicious Rabbits and saw the atrocities committed by the regent and his goons, speak with such admiration about the same man lovingly referred to as Pastor Dan, it gutted him. Trying his best to mask his feelings, he shrugged.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, sis. Back when I was in the Corps, we swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, not any one leader.
Lewis raced along the C&O Canal Trail on the mountain bike he purchased last week. Back when he was in the Marines, they said that no matter what your MOS was, you were a rifleman first. Similarly, as a vicious rabbit, you were first a cyclist. Lewis had led his warriors across Virginia and throughout the mid-Atlantic region on mountain bikes, riding into the deepest, darkest reaches where civilizations collapse under its own weight, sprouted up gangs of predators as well as innocent victims, and into battle against theocratic lunatics. The bike-mounted cavalry was mobile in a world where dead vehicles clogged the roads. The brand new mountain bike he was riding up on his way to Maryland was far superior to his old Kona in many respects. The frame was lighter. There were front, rear, and seat shock absorbers, along with disc brakes. Something like this would be worth 100 pairs of underwear in their original packaging back in the real world. And this fancy new GPS app on his iPhone, Lewis knew exactly where he was. He had to remind himself that he no longer had to watch out for booby traps or ambushes set up by bandits, just joggers oblivious to the world. He pushed his lumpy body hard. Since arriving here, he was shocked to see so many obese people. The collapse of industrial food scale production, refrigeration, and transportation not only killed off most of humanity during the first desperate years, it had a way of ending what they referred to as the obesity epidemic. While Lewis wouldn't describe his counterpart's body here as obese, it was flabby to be sure. It had gone through years of soft, sedentary living. On the plus side, there were fewer aches in comparison, as Lewis acquired a lot of injuries over the years in the real world, and his counterpart's joints didn't protest as much given the lower mileage. On his way back to Arlington, he turned off into the Grover Archibald Trail, a heavily wooded footpath in the district. Panting, Lewis made his way up into the thickets as far away as he could from the sounds of engines revving along Canal Road. The sounds of traffic, while more distant, were still ever present. Commercial airliners on approach to land at Reagan National, flights taking off. So much noise that he hadn't noticed until all of the engines fell silent 2 decades ago. Lewis sat down in the grass and positioned himself the way Dora had taught him. He tried to reach out to Gaia. The entrance to Monticello was just a mile off of I-64, where tens of thousands of people wandered on foot, going in both directions. Monticello was in a precarious position, being so close to the highway. Lewis feared a wandering group would find this place. Maybe there were people out there that knew Thomas Jefferson's home was not just a museum, but a living museum with active farms. He had been standing watch in the darkness for the last couple of hours. Perhaps it was 3. Lewis didn't know for certain, as the only working timepieces they had available was the 18th century clock inside the mansion and someone's Rolex knockoff. Down the mountain, across the ridge, Lewis could see campfires on the interstate. For now, he, his sister, and the rest of the people, mostly congregants of the Unitarian Church from nearby Charlottesville, led by Reverend Dora Luevino, were safely out of view from the wanderers. The night breeze was whispering that lady's voice. Lewis tried to make out what she was saying when he heard footsteps. He turned around and saw the silhouetted shape of the Reverend barely visible in the dark, and he lowered his hunting rifle. Reverend Dora was petite. A travel-size Unitarian, she called herself. Tiny as she was unquestionably brave. When they crossed paths a couple of weeks earlier, he and Vivian caught sight of Reverend Luevino standing toe-to-toe against a group of survivalists who were shaking down wanderers on the road for food, water, medicine, and drugs. Dora was not having it. She had an entire congregation of Unitarians with her, but they weren't much help as none of them had firearms. That being said, they were accompanied by a crew of teenagers armed with compound bows, and all aimed their arrows at the survivalists who brandished assault rifles at Dora. It looked like some wild version of cowboys and Indians. Lewis heard the whisper. He assumed the voice was referring to the tiny lady in Coke bottle glasses, telling the corpulent guy in a Confederate baseball cap and his buddies that they were fucking with forces that they could not comprehend. Brave words from a woman who had terrible vision and was 100 pounds wet, flanked by a gaggle of sweaty pacifists and elven wannabes. Lewis turned to Vivian, who unslung her rifle and took aim while he knelt by a car engine block. Vivian shot off the man's hat, like in the movies, while Lewis shot between one of the other man's feet and followed up with,
"This is General Lewis Henry of the 2nd Marine Division. You are only going to be given one warning. Move along."
The survivalists ran off. It was a good thing, too, as both of their rifles were .30-06 bolt action with only 6 rounds in the mag. 2 hand-me-downs from their uncle, who taught Vivian to shoot. Back up in Monticello, Dora approached Lewis standing watch.
How's it going, General?
Reverend Dora had been referring to Lewis as General ever since their introduction on the road.
No sign of movement, Rev.
She handed him a bowl of rabbit stew, to which he eagerly dove in. Soup never tasted so good. Lewis looked up into the night sky. The star field was incredible. He hadn't seen so many stars since Iraq. He heard whispering again. It was her, whoever she was.
I couldn't make out what she was saying. Could you?
Lewis turned to Dora, his eyes wide with surprise.
You heard her too?
Gaia's voice has been hard not to hear since she sent the EMPs.
Who's Gaia?
She's you, Lewis, and me, and all of us. She's the living organism of Earth of which we're a part, and which is part of the living consciousness of all existence.
Huh.
Yeah, I know. This is just some witchy New Age stuff spouted by some fun-sized, four-eyed broad.
I didn't say that, Rev.
It's okay. She's spoken to you, and you've been listening. She led you to me, didn't she?
He couldn't argue with that. Ever since the EMP attacks, he kept hearing this woman's voice whispering to him, and it led him to a place with a working farm and good people, even if they were a bit on the woo-woo side.
I appreciate you taking us in, my sister and I.
Well, it's the least I can do, seeing that y'all saved our asses.
Now, I don't want to sound all, I'm in, pull up the ladder. But we've been taking in a lot of wanderers from the roads. I mean, there's only so many potatoes and carrots that can grow. And only so many rabbits we can trap.
The rabbits threatened to become a menace on the farm. On the plus side, rabbit meat became a reliable, albeit the only source of protein, as deer was nowhere to be found.
I mean, what if we're discovered by all of those wanderers out there? You ever seen that movie Cocoon?
The one with the old people who discover aliens encased in rocks in a pool that gives the old men boners?
Lewis chuckled. Dora sure had a mouth on her for a reverend. Then again, she was a Unitarian.
Well, when the rest of the retirement home discovers the secret, they all rush into the pool, draining the aliens of their powers, but leaving them no more revitalized.
And you fear by allowing newcomers in, we're inviting the possibility that our cocoon will be drained, leaving us all to starve?
I hate to be so callous, but yes.
You're not wrong. We can't save everyone. I know Gaia must have wrestled with the idea of emitting the EMPs, knowing that so many would die.
Come on, Rev. It was an attack.
Oh, really? Well, if it was an attack, where's the armies of Chinese or North Koreans you claimed who did it to finish us off? Where's their fighter jets and bombers to take out our bases? Where's our military to rush to the rescue?
Lewis had been mystified by that himself. Where was the enemy? And where was the rest of the U.S. military to shore up the capital region? Where was NATO to fly over U.S. airspace like they did after 9/11? He hadn't seen a single contrail since the whole thing began.
This wasn't caused by man, Lewis. I think deep down, you know that.
Sunni extremists and rogue state actors was something Lewis was prepared to fight. But an attack by the Earth? He grimaced.
Reverend, how do we defend ourselves against the Earth?
Dora gave him a warm smile.
Lewis, we were never meant to defend ourselves against the Earth. We were meant to be its extension into the universe to reach other beings. Instead, we got consumed by our own short-sightedness. These EMPs she sent, as tragic as they are, she sent them to save us, to allow us to adjust course. But you are right to be concerned. There are those consumed by a void who seek to harm us. That's why Gaia chose you. You will teach us how to protect ourselves. You will be the one who will build a corpse. I know you don't like the word army being a devil dog and all. You will be the one who will establish a corps that will stand up to the thugs trying to take advantage of the weak.
Lewis scoffed.
Sorry, Reverend. You got the wrong guy.
I think I'm looking at exactly the right guy. You demonstrated that out on the highway. And your experience as a Marine officer is invaluable.
Look, I was a Marine once upon a time, but I was just a green-ass lieutenant when an IED got my platoon.
Lewis recalled the moment of horror, the panic. During all of the chaos, when the Hajis were sealing the coffin shut on his men, he swore he heard a voice telling him to stay down. Was it a voice? Was it cowardice?
I'm not expecting Patton, some larger-than-life egomaniac who has no humility or self-doubt. I mean, guys like that are no fun at parties. But you are a leader, Lewis. You are.
Reverend, you don't know me. So let me disabuse you of any misconceptions. I don't know how to lead anything.
Lewis stopped himself as the memories threatened to overwhelm him.
You're afraid, but not of dying. You're afraid of fucking up and letting everyone down.
You're pretty loose with F words, aren't you, Reverend?
And you're allowing your trauma to define you instead of informing you.
He was unsure how to respond. He wanted to protest, but she was right. The Reverend reached up and put a hand on his cheek.
Everything that has happened in your life was to lead you here. If you think we're both insane to hear the voice of Gaia, then this means nothing. But I think you know you have been guided here for a purpose. It's okay to have doubts about yourself, about me, about Gaia, fine. But please, Lewis, don't shut us out. Let us in.
Lewis felt heat in Dora's palm, like she was burning. He looked into her eyes through the thick glasses. Just then, he heard footsteps and voices speaking softly in Spanish. Men, women, some children.
Sounds like we have some new friends.
I bet they're hungry.
The two walked over to the gate to find the Ramirez clan, who in the coming days would help teach the community of suburbanites how to farm winter crops to keep Monticello fed.
Step back, doors closing.
The metro was packed, just the way he remembered it was back in the day. The LED displays overhead advertised one kind of drug or another to treat ailments like restless leg syndrome, weight loss, and long flu, a condition that some survivors of the superflu experienced years after the pandemic. Everyone on the metro was glued to their smartphones. Back before the shift, Lewis would take the blue line. And while the cars were just as crowded back then, people at least stood patiently. Now they were all struggling to force enough space to hold their smartphones in front of them. The woman standing next to him was on Litter. It was one of the social media sites that everyone wasted their time on. When Lewis first learned about it, he didn't understand why it consumed everybody's attention. But social media was how Pastor Dan gathered such a following in this world. The woman next to him scrolled down to a post showing Pastor Dan's face with a bunch of likes, angry faces, and comments. Lewis led the vicious rabbits' bike-mounted cavalry to the gates of the Regent's compound. The hardened lambs of God and sheepdogs weren't going to surrender. It was a brutal battle, and Lewis lost a lot of good men and women storming their lair, but they finally broke through. As commander of the Greater Monticello's military, he led the charge up the steps of the compound. When they entered the mansion, Lewis expected heavy fighting, but instead all he found were bodies. Lewis gestured to his second, whose team moved in to secure the compound, room by room, using the techniques he learned in Iraq.
Clear! All clear!
Bodies of men dressed in suits and body armor were everywhere. Lewis examined the corpses to see foam around the mouth of the dead sheepdogs. They poisoned themselves.
Bingo!
Lewis raced up the staircase into the grand hall where he found a huddled mass of corpses. A couple of women, several children, all dressed up in their Sunday best, lay there lifeless. He walked over and knelt down. Under the pile of bodies, there he was, the regent himself, Pastor Dan, servant of the home of the faithful, protector of the flock, the man who called for the enslavement and murder of all who opposed him. He seemed less impressive up close. Like the others, froth covered his mouth.
Coward.
He stood up and gestured to his radio operator, who just replaced the vacuum tubes on the set.
Corporal, send the word downfall.
It wasn't exactly what Lewis hoped for. Their mission was not only to bring an end to this empire that threatened every free republic, but to bring Dan Patterson and his henchmen to trial. Yes, it would be held by the Allies, but Dora would see to it that they had a fair trial. Corporal Jenkins held the handset and had a look of shock.
Corporal, this is it. It's over. Send the message.
Yes, General, I will. It's just... I just received word from Monticello. Reverend Luevano. General, she's passed.
Lewis closed his eyes. The warriors touched their hearts. Some of the Catholic warriors made a sign of the cross. Dora had been suffering from cancer for the last 3 years. Without modern medicine, there wasn't really anything to be done. The doctor had given her 4 months, but the tough little bird was obstinate. She held on throughout the war, giving hope and guidance to Gaians and non-Gaians alike. She became a symbol of defiance to evil. Lewis had hoped she would live long enough to hear the Monticellans and the Orange Pact Alliance had defeated the Lambs of God. Sadly, that was not to be.
Understood. Please send the message.
The corporal, whose eyes were filled with tears, saluted and radioed the message. They had vanquished evil. The war was over. Lewis wished he could tell her. He placed his hand to his heart.
Gaia, please care for our sister. May Dora know a new dimension of consciousness, free of the void.
Lewis sat at the table with a view of the litter office on M Street from yet another Starbucks. They were on every corner in downtown D.C. He had his phone open to the litter app. One good thing about this ludicrous social media hold that Pastor Dan had was that he posted everything he was doing and where he was going. There was zero operational security. Lewis was able to literally follow the regent's movements. The bastard had been meeting regularly with his tech bros, leveraging the emergence of AI to better track everyone's online activities, and marry it with the multitude of poll cams, traffic light cams, individual home security cams, as well as phones. Lewis got a ping. The regent's caravan was a few minutes out. He took a deep breath and prepared himself. He stood up and brushed his hand up against the pistol on his belt. This Pastor Dan might not have the same memories from the mass murderer in his world, but it didn't matter. He was the same servant of the void that sought to infect the world with disease and hate. Lewis was about to enact some measure of justice in this universe when suddenly he heard a voice from behind him. A voice saying words he thought he'd never hear again.
Vicious rabbits never say die.
Join us next week for episode 2 of the 3-part miniseries, Ride the Wilderness.
Most of the background music has been provided by Mixkit and Fesliyan Studios. In this episode, you also heard The Scientist, covered by Brooklyn Duo. The following actors are available on Fiverr. Lewis Henry, played by Stefan Stewart, Vivian by Seldal Vogt, and Dora Luevino by Bree and Aaron.